Good evening. So tonight's plan is, I can't remember. Yes, strong typing. Do strong type user IDs and also the group IDs as well. Then possibly refactoring our switching on and switching off events so that we have separate events for users, groups and anonymous users being switched on and off. And finally, if we get time for it, trying to write validation for all of our new write methods, and going to try and use the mediator pipeline to automatically hook up validators for us so we don't have to explicitly do anything. So let's crack on with the first task. Just check that we've not got any commits unstaged. So what I wanted to do was create a user ID, and we've already got a toggle ID here. So the user ID is basically the same as this, except for a user ID. Now ideally we wouldn't want to have to rewrite the whole class again, but this not being a functional language, as those seem to mostly support aliasing, we can't just alias a type and say and use the compiler to deal with it. So we have to do it all ourselves. Can we get away with reusing any of this? Probably not. Right. So let's create a new user ID class. And well, in the case of a user ID, we don't actually want to create. Do we want to create new? We're going to be relying on the API providing it. So in fact, our user ID will have a parse method and an empty, but it won't have a, well, the create new will be the same as the parse method, so we won't bother with a create new, we'll just have parse. So first things first, we'll give it a private constructor, and we'll have the string user, and we'll store that to a read-only field, and then we shall implement equatable of user ID and generate quantity members. Right, string comparison. Do I want to ignore case? Probably not, as this is coming from end users, I guess. Yeah, no, actually I will ignore case. It's the username, it shouldn't be case sensitive. Yep. Actually, did I want to allow the field to be null? No, it'll be an empty string, so let's redo that. No. Use the right method. Fields can't be null. Order ignore case. Yep. Right, there we go. And then we should copy our implementations of the operator overloads. And in this case, it's not a toggle ID, it is a user ID. Do we need anything else? Yes, we need our parse and our empty methods. See, copy and paste is a design pattern that's alive and well. We shall create a user ID out of these, and this is actually a string called user. More annoyingly, when we get to do the group version of this, it'll be identical. Yeah. String.empty. Right, and as before, we actually want to serialize this as a string, so we'll need a converter for it as well. And this is not a toggle ID converter, it is a user ID converter. And in our case we don't need to parse it to a GUID anymore, we just need to use the string. So we'll do that. And we'll do that. Put that in there. Delete that. And delete that. No, that needs to be outside that. Good. And now we just apply this to the top of the class. No, that's fine. Tika, is that how you pronounce it? Either way. Yeah, I prefer Rider to Visual Studio. I find it faster, and as it's cross-platform, when I eventually ditch Windows 10 and move back to using Linux all the time, I can continue doing my .NET dev using Rider there. So yeah, and as I already had a license to ReSharper, it was only €50 more, I think, to get a Rider license. Right, that should be it for the user ID, but we'll add some tests for it. Class user ID tests. In fact, we can copy part of these tests now. With these, we might actually be able to get away with abstracting the base class for them and just have ID tests. But yeah, that would work. I think we can extract a base class of these anyway. Let's delete this file then. Let's try this. Public abstract. Abstract class ID tests. And then we want a protected abstract T. We'll make this generic. Create new protected abstract T parse string input. Yeah, and then if we grab these test methods and move them into here, instead of calling toggle ID create new, we'll now call create new. And instead of that, we will use T. And instead of that, we will call parse, which will need to be toString. Now let's make that an object. It can be up to the input to deal with what that is. Yeah, so now this inherits ID tests of toggle ID, and instead of having these, implement our missing methods, which in this case is just toggle ID to create new, and parse is toggle ID parse need GUID. Now, as we're passing in GUIDs to these things, you know what, we could actually make it a GUID as the input, because the other ID is going to work with strings, so we can just toString it. So we'll do that. And that also ensures that we end up with unique values when we're doing the tests. So pass input. Now we can delete these. Now theoretically, when we run the tests, we shouldn't get any breakages. Source crispin.tests, crispin.tests. No matching command. Ah, yes, it would help if I had the word test in there, I suppose. Right, so now we can duplicate this class for our user ID. And we just replace this with this, this with this, this with this, this with this. toString. And here, well, we can do a GUID for our version. Right. So now if you run the tests, hopefully they'll still all pass, and there should be 102 tests now rather than 100. Or they could, not pass. Right. And they don't pass for a good reason. Haven't overridden a method. So public override string to string. Don't capitalize it. And that's going to return user. Right. The other way you can do this, rather than overriding toString, is to either have an interface that will expose some kind of getValue method, which will return your end of field, or you can move the whole converter class to be inside, and then you'll be able to go value dot underscore user, like that, I think. I'm sure you used to be able to do something like that. I know I've done something similar before. Maybe marking it was internal. Oh, value isn't casted. Oh, yeah. So if we do user ID, wrap the whole thing in brackets. Now I might be able to make that private again. Yeah. So you can do that instead of having to toString it if you wish to, for toString to return something different, but I'm happy with toString returning the actual internal value. Yep, 102 tests passed. Good. So let's just go down to our toggle ID tests and move them into matching files. Look at that. Right. What's changed in the project file? dc star.csproj. A new line at the end of the file. Very useful, that. Yeah, I'm not committing that. Git reset ahead. Right. So, toggle ID tests, split and test extract base class and test user ID 2. And I'll just check out that, because committing the fact that the line ending has changed is really neither here nor there. Right, so now we have a user ID. Let's add the... No, let's deal with user IDs first. So if we go into our toggle, now the interesting thing is a user ID is this, the user operating on the API. But we also have a user parameter and a group parameter here. Now, as both the user of the API and the user of querying for the API could be different, we can either have the same type representing both, the user ID, or we can have a separate type. So we might have a user ID and a group ID for who's querying and whether a toggle switched on, and then we might have a, I don't know, manager ID, authorizer ID, something like that, for who's actually doing the change. But I would suggest in most systems they could be the same. I guess you'd end up getting the authentication token from the same service for who's an active administrator and who's a querying user. I think for the time being I shall replace just this user concept. We'll leave the get current user concept alone for the time being. We'll come back and see what we want to do with that later. So here is now a user ID. So we now have to follow this through, finding all the compilation errors. It's another great thing about strong typing. Just follow the compilation errors. So we've got one here. And that then calls handle switching, which takes in a user. Now here we've got some validation going on. Is it null or white space? We can't do that anymore because we don't have the concept of a null or white space user, but we do have an empty. So what we can convert this to is just say if user is not equal to user ID dot empty, and we can now go back into here and change this and this, and we now lose the comparer. So I did make the right call on making it an ordinal ignore case when implementing the user ID, because there's a comparer. And user ID here as well. And do we have any in here? Yep. Contains key string user ID. Not string, user ID. If user ID is null or white space. So if user ID double equals user ID dot user ID empty. Otherwise, get the groups for the user, and get groups now needs to have a concept of a user ID as well. And here's another one, now that we've changed that. And there is another one in here, which means our event still has the other user. So do that, switch off, yep. Users, where is it? What? Am I just being blind? Yes, I am. It's part of an object literal. Users, there we go. and here as well. And to jump around these various errors, I've got Alt page down and Alt page up bound to next and previous error in solution. So this should be equal to userid.empty. This is now userid.parse. As is this. In fact, I think most of these are going to be that, so let's copy and paste the first part. Right, what do we got over here? User, e.user in events state. Now I thought that. Oh no, that's just custom class. So yeah. That is now a user ID, which means it can't be const anymore. It has to be static read only. Just do that. We could also have implemented an implicit conversion between string and user ID, but I find that that just muddies the usage a bit and would mean that any places where I was passing a string through to a user ID would just get automatically converted. Ideally, we want to do this parsing and conversion of the types as early into the API as possible, so that we catch any errors before they actually propagate anywhere. In fact, these are all users, aren't they? Static read only. Static read only. Right. And finally, that needs to be one of these. And we better check that because this isn't strongly typed. But it's just passing in users which are already created. Yep, that's fine. Right. There's a bit more parsing in this file. And this is kind of boring, just going through and doing find and replace, but at least the compiler is telling me what I need to do. I'm not convinced that should... No, I think that should be empty actually. Either way, we'll recreate our tests as they were, so that we've only changed compilation errors and not changed any meanings of any tests, hopefully. Assuming this all builds, with luck, all of the tests will still pass. And as we have been modifying both the REST projects and the domain, I will use the test script I have in the solution root, which tests both projects. Oh, 17 passed, and hopefully 102. That's a lot of errors. Right, what have we broken? Value cannot be null. Key. That's interesting. When testing all toggly things, user equals null. Interesting. Let's go and have a look at that test. When testing all toggly things. I wonder if it's because of that. Well, we're passing it a user ID at least. Was that the right bit that was? State user. No, we actually had the user parameter. It was the events that lacked their user. Ah, it's because we have an anonymous user. So this needs to also be pardon me, static read-only string, read-only user ID, and in this case it's user ID empty. And we'll rename that as well, just so that we get one less warning. Right, let's rerun those tests. Once this is finished building. Fingers crossed. Oh, less tests failing at least. Right, we still have some nulls in that. Which is weird because none of that lot can be null anymore. We have an empty array of states. I wonder if it's because of this. Let's have a look. Right, so we'll start with line 74 of this file, which is clearly getting a null user from somewhere. So let's go and have a look at this. So clearly our user is empty is not working as a check. And we've implemented reference equals and operator overloading. So somehow we're getting a blank user and then it's still passing that user is not empty. It's because user is a class and can actually be null. In fact, we want user ID to be a struct. Which means I need a different set of overloads for these. And I'll get rid of those for a second. This, generate equality members, ordinal ignore case, fields can't be null. Well, I suppose technically they can be null now. hashcode already exists. Replace. Alright, put that back up here. Do that. Well, that's a really horribly written statement. Do this instead. Now, do I still need to override these? Excellent. So in fact, this should be user id.empty. But it can't because it needs to be a constant. I think using a struct is the right thing to do. It is a tiny little class. But we could add a conversion from null, I think. And then make null, a null as equivalent to calling userid.empty. But we are going to change this API anyway. And checking it with null is the wrong thing to do anyway, so we'll do that. Because we are now checking it, we're checking it against whether the user ID is empty or not, so that's fine. What's this class's problem? Switch on with no values. Yeah, I suppose. So that is what we'll have to do for now. That. Yeah, it's definitely not the right way of doing that. Right, once this one's so we haven't got operator opening, we do need to implement it then. User ID. Yes. Okay, there we go. Now, as they can ever be null, we can just say that, I think. Yeah, because they can't ever be null. That needs to be empty. New toggle switched on, that needs one of those, as does this. Yeah, these events definitely need to change. We'll have one separate event for each type of user being switched on or off. So a user, a group, or anonymous. Alright, and let's rerun the tests. So the other option is to rework the events first and then come back and change the user IDs to be strong typed at that point. That might be a more sensible course of action because then we'll have singular breakages rather than a lot of breaks when I change these overload methods instead. Oh, it didn't compile. CPU. The thing that's making me consider upgrading the laptop the most is, well, apart from the fact that it's falling apart, is that I'm getting irritated by waiting for compilations while streaming. I want it to all be instant. Right, so everything passed. DFR changes. Yep. So git add user ID, change to struct, use throughout, through. How do you spell throughout? Close enough. Right, let's do the same with the group ID. So I am going to cheat a lot by copying the entire implementation of this class and just finding and replacing user ID to group ID. Now, there are ways you can do this within inheritance, but you end up needing another generic type anyway. You end up creating an identifier of T, and that makes it means you have to have another type, which is your user ID. Oh, the exclamation mark what didn't work. That's weird. I tested it just before the scream as well. Let's see what happens if I do it. That's annoying. Yeah, so what I'm working on is a Restful feature toggling service, which has got event sourcing for its storage mechanism. The code is all up on GitHub, and I push it at the end of each stream each day. And I'm trying to stream the entire development process. So about the only thing that's not been streamed is once when I had an error when streaming through OBS, and I didn't notice until after the stream. And I think I've done some README file updates well offline as well. Right, so let's replace user ID with group ID. And import all the missing things. And then we can go down here, copy this test. Wow, that was useful. I swear my keyboard is messing with me today. The laptop was messing with me earlier. Just suddenly went to about 4,000% fan speed, tried to take off, and then just sat there doing that and nothing responded. That was a bit worrying. What makes me use Rider of Visual Studio? I'm a wannabe hipster. No, I prefer it. It's slightly faster than Visual Studio, and it's cross-platform, and I intend to dump Windows 10 at some point and go back to using Ubuntu. And when I do that, I will want a nice IDE to use, so use Rider now, and once all my projects are at least .NET Core project system based, I can switch back over to using Linux and have less advertising and other annoying crap all over the place. Right, so now that we've got a group ID, let's go back and do the same thing again. Group ID. Right, and that can no longer be null. And now we just follow the compilation errors again. This now wants to be group ID.empty. This will too. So let's go and fix that. And now I'll fix the event. And also, another advantage to using Rider is this presentation mode, which I'm using to stream with. Because if I don't use presentation mode, you have to try and read text that's that small, which is, harder. So, as long as I remember to activate presentation mode, you get nice big amounts of screen to see. And anything that makes it easier on people watching is good. I've been thinking about using a plugin for Twitch that'll put my keyboard shortcuts on screen as well, but only for things that involve the control key, basically, because I use a lot of keyboard shortcuts while developing. I don't often use the mouse if I can avoid it. So it might be kind of interesting to see what keyboard shortcuts I use. I'd be interested to see what they are. I don't remember what they are half the time. And when they don't work, it's usually because my fingers have reset back to using a Finnish keyboard layout as opposed to an English keyboard layout, which confuses me briefly each time I switch machines. Or if Windows 10 decides that it'll activate the keyboard shortcut, which I don't know what it is, that switches my keyboard layout to Finnish. What is a feature in this case? As in feature toggling? Anything. An example would be, in my last company, we wanted to replace the emailing system we used for sending emails from our client applications. And to do that, we implemented a new system and put the dependency injection container had a hook to a feature toggling. It wasn't a feature toggling service, but a configuration file on the user's machines. And on startup, it would read that and switch on whichever emailing system we wanted to use. So we found one user who hit the issues with the older emailing system a lot, and just switched him and only him onto using this new system. And then once he'd trialed it for a couple of weeks and we'd ironed out some bugs that he found, we then moved on to switching on it for 2 people in his team, and then 3, and then his whole team, and then we worked up the company until everyone was using the new system. And by doing that, when we hit an error, I think it was when we had his whole team on it, we hit like a kind of I can't really go into what exactly it is, but a backlog error that we'd have only hit with enough users hitting it. We were able to just switch them back to using the old system while we fixed the error. So yeah, that's why that's what one of the usages of feature toggles. Another use is for A/B testing. Maybe you want to, I don't know, change the color of a button on a website and work out if you get more people buying your product when the buy button is green as opposed to blue. You'd implement a toggle for that and have some kind of selection and say 50% of traffic gets the toggle switched on, 50% gets it switched off. So that's another kind of usage for it. You can also do canary releasing, so you might release an entirely new version of software to a specific subset of your users. In fact, canary releasing is where the name of this project comes from. As a child, we had a cockatiel called Crispin, and although he wasn't a canary, that was, well, I figured it was a good name anyway. So yeah, that's pretty much my sum up of feature toggling. Right, what's this one about? String is not assignable to group ID. Well, it's not. Where did a string come from? Get groups for. There we go. Do that. And right. Handle switching. E-group I think is probably still, yeah, a string. Do that. And our constants, I'm pretty sure, are strings, yep, so these need to be static read only. Yes, I have the Windows key space shortcut set up, and I know about that one, but there is something else that does it. Or at least I think there's something else to do it, because I'm pretty sure I haven't hit Windows key space on the times that it has randomly switched. But as to what the other keyboard shortcut is, I don't know. luckily, once I found out about Windows key space, I'm able to switch the language back and forth fairly easily. There we go. Groups. Is it this one? Yes. Right, now we come to the parsing. Do that. Oh, can I do this? Does it? No, it's not intelligent enough. One of the features I miss from things like Atom and Sublime is being able to highlight a block of text and just hit a bracket key and then get a bracket around the text rather than deletion of the text. And yeah, the reason I have the two languages set up is because occasionally I need to type some of the weird Finnish letters. Yeah, quotation marks are never in the right. I think, does Rider do quotationing automatically? Let's find out. No. Yeah. And multi-line selection as well. So you can, when you select a bunch of lines and do split lines selection into lines or something, and then you can edit 10 lines at once. I miss that a lot. That's one of the reasons I have Atom open in the background. Normally, if I'm building up quick string lists and things, I use Atom to edit all of the lines at once. Right, that all built. Let's see how many errors we've got this time when we run the tests. Hopefully less than last time. Oh, no failures in the REST project. Ooh, no failures in that project either. That's nice. Yeah, what's going on there? Oh, I must have just typed status too quickly for the output. Get DC. Alright. Yes, good. Fine. Yeah. Okay, thanks for watching. See you later. Right. Group ID. Implement throughout. Codebase. Right. Now that we've got that, now let's refactor our switching. Now, although we had at the moment a switch on and a switch off method, which effectively had three states, anonymous, for a user, or for a group, but there's nothing to stop someone specifying a user and a group in one, and that's a bit weird and I'm not quite sure how I'd handle that. So what I'm going to do is split these classes, and we'll have a public class toggle switched off for user, and that's an no, it's not an elapsed event arg, it's an event. That gets a user ID. I kind of wish there was a way of doing that automatically without having to declare a constructor. I mean, if it's a get-only property and there's nothing else in the class, should automatically consider there being a single constructor. But hey. And then we will do this. So we have a test that will shout at us if we don't override this. Right, so we have switched off for user. In fact, let's just delete this. And we'll delete this on class as well. And we should now just go through and create the others. So switched on for user. This is a constructor. Turned on. Right, and then we can copy and paste these and replace the word user with group. Group. place, yes, 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 yes. Good. Right, so that's groups and users done. Now we need anonymous. I was considering renaming it to be everyone, because it is everyone, but it isn't, because anonymous and everyone is different. Anonymous means someone who's not authenticating with the system, whereas everyone means anyone who is querying this, even users who are defined to be in a group. So later we will implement that as a feature, but for the time being, anonymous. Now the difference between this one is we don't have the concept of an anonymous ID, so we don't actually need that, or this. We just need that for anonymous users. Right. We now should have a nice load of compilation errors. Oh, why does that dialog no longer have those things ticked? Right, let's go into here. So the first thing we need to do is, well, the easiest thing to do is handle our switched on and switched off events. So I've toggle switched on for user. Why is that not suggesting events? Ah, because I can't spell. Oh, did that work? Oh, it did. Alright. Toggle. That's better. Right, second time's charm. What are we missing? Off for user. That's weird. And luckily, as we're not in a 1.0 release or anything for this, I can get away with just changing my events without actually worry. No, don't remove an unused class. I can get away with changing my events without having to worry about things. And now we've got the same class twice. What the hell is going on? That class wasn't there a second ago. Yeah, so I can just modify the events without worrying about breaking any existing deployments, because there are no existing deployments. Not even I have an existing deployment. So we'll have off for user. Do this. Now, something that I could implement is a reflection-based registration. So rather than having to manually type these out, just having the existence of an apply method with an event in it. The downside to doing that is ReSharper marks everything as unused. It's not much of a downside, but I like this because it's explicit in what's happening. But the downside is you end up with quite a lot of methods. Not quite a lot of methods, quite a lot of these registrations. Which could be an indication of something bad happening, you know, bad design maybe. Your class has got a lot of different things to do, but now, do we need to do anything special for this? Yes, I think we're going to end up refactoring this handle switching. Just going to see what it does. Yeah, what we can do here is create our own overload, which just takes in the user ID. And so we don't need group and we don't need anonymous. And that's just bool active. And then we have the same thing again but for group. Has group. Oh. No, not group. Group. Now you see we get a compilation error here because I'm updating the wrong array. One of the many advantages of using strong typing. Right, and then we'll have handle switching, which will just take in that. Doesn't need that, or that. That just handles the anonymous version. Right. So here we can now just say e. Now, for this is anonymous, we don't have that. We can just do this and this. And then let's just copy these. I'm wondering if I should move this last toggled state into the handle state class, because then I could just have a one-liner here. But I'm not sure that that class actually has that responsibility. It's just for computing what the state is, not for when the state changed. So e.user. e.user. And then we do the same again, but this time it's a group. Group. Yes, 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 yes. Right. And then finally we need to change these. So switch on given a user, switch on given a group, and switch on given nothing. So of that. In fact, let's just do for user. Yeah, we can do that. It's short enough. For user. There we go. Group ID. Group. I wish it would stop prefixing that with an at. It's not a real keyword. In fact, I don't even know where it is a keyword for. I guess something to do with link. And finally, this is for anonymous. Now, I don't like not having. We've got switch on given a user ID. Do I want to leave it as just switch on and switch off? Because that implies it'll affect everyone. It's kind of like the anonymous state is the default state of it, I'd say. So switch on default, change default, turn default on. No, by default. That'll do. And then we don't have a user. And And we don't have a user there, and that's got an anonymous on it. Right. Now just a million other errors to handle. Well, it basically does the same thing, doesn't it? And what about that? Yes, and that then just calls the switch on and switch off. That's annoying. I feel like I'm copying a lot of methods around at the moment, which I don't like very much. But I don't really see an alternative at the moment. Let's deal with anonymous first. Hang on, where is that? That's the toggle view. That's here that needs to change. Maybe we could use... Oh, I'd like to be able to use a mix-in or something to deal with this. But we can't do mix-ins in C#, so that rules that one out. Now, I mean, I could define an interface with these methods on, but I'm not convinced there's any point in that. Because I'd then have to implement them anyway, so... And all that would really make sure is that I've got the right names. I'll have to see if there's a better way to do this later on. So, as usual, I'll try and ignore the problem until I have to actually deal with it. Because later on I might find that I've got some other way of dealing with this. User group, and that's now by default. Right. Right, that needs to be user. As does that. Group and group. And then this needs to not have the by default on it. e.user, e.user, e.group, e.group. Right. Yeah, I'm really not certain I like that. Right. Here we can start getting the improvements. So we now have switch on by default, which is for anonymous people. As is that. Yeah, no, that wouldn't make any difference. Right. When updating, it should have a single item. Should it? That's for anonymous. Yeah, and we don't even need that anymore because we don't have those properties there. So we can then do that dot should be of type that. Oh, that's better. Right, next, toggle switched on for user. So we don't need this empty group ID at the end. And we're switching it on for anonymous. By default. So we should have a toggle switch on for anonymous. Maybe we'll rename that toggle switched on by default. Toggle default state perhaps. Get rid of this group ID. Right. Yep. For anonymous. In fact, they're all going to be for anonymous, aren't they? Handle switching. Now we can no longer handle switching. We'll either have a user or things, so this now need to actually become a method. We'll say if e.user is not equal to user ID empty. Do one thing, else if e.group is not equal to user ID empty, group ID even, then we'll do something, else we'll do something else. Now, do we have any of these where they can both be empty? No, it doesn't look like it. So, when user ID has a value, when group ID has a value, when neither of them have a value. So this is handle switching with no arguments. This is one with just the group, and this is one with just the user. Right, what do we have here? Switch on and a user ID, so get rid of the group. That should be for a user. Switch on for anonymous. Switch off by default. Switched on for anonymous. Switched off for anonymous. Anonymous or default? I still don't know. Right, let's run all the tests, see how broken this is. And again, as I've modified both the REST API and the domain project, I use the test script, which will run both of them. Oh, no errors in the REST API. Once we're done with this, I'll then move on to dealing with validation. Right, let's have a look at this. True should be false, but was not. When a toggle is switched off, all toggle tests. All toggle tests when a toggle is switched off. Right, let's have a look at what's happening. So we have a toggle created, we switch it on for anonymous, and then we switch it on for anonymous again. That should probably be off. Yep. Right. So we'll look at the next one. That's when a toggle is switched off. When testing more toggly things. True should be, false should be true, but was not. We only got 2 errors. That's interesting. Right. We only get 2 of those. Yeah, it's just stack traces being a bit confusing. Man, I miss having these being able to run in Rider. Right, stack trace. Right, there's our first one. So, active was true, group is group 2, user was null. When testing all toggly things. So, I suspect it's this if statement being wrong. So we had one event where active was true for group 2, an empty user. Empty in group 2, yep. So that one would have been true and run, not anything else. And we were testing it against user 2 in group 2, and we expected it to be in there. User 2 should be in group 2, and we switched on group 2, so yeah, it should be. So the question is, why not? It could well be that we've messed up handle switching. Group, it's not empty. That's group, activate the group. Yeah, no, that seems fine. Man, I wish I could debug this. It would make things so much quicker. Group 1, group 2. So we say is active if the user ID was empty, and we were testing with user 2 group 2. So that's not going to do that. The users won't contain it, so it won't do that. We're now going to get the groups. Where the groups contain that key, select that group. And our groups are still as before, so maybe a group ID is missing a comparison. Could be this, perhaps. But our groups actually have names, so well, group ID really shouldn't have a field called user. Group. Right. Well, now we got that out of the way. If the group is not null, use the group. Yeah, well, that's fine. But we only get 2 failures in that, which is weird. Let's do that. Maybe we'll get a bit easier to read stack traces then. I could of course try using Visual Studio, but last time I tried to launch that, lots of bad things happened and it took forever. And I don't think I've even got the 2017 targeting pack for .NET Core 2 installed either. Alright, 2 failures. definitely are setting up the user to be in the right group. I wonder if it is the hash coding. Let's just expand our other tests a second. So if we go down to our ID tests, we're only really testing serialization at the moment. That's some really weird highlighting going on there. Wow, that's really interesting. Let's just shut all the windows. Oh well, muddle through. So in fact, when checking for equality, I think we will have two more methods: protected abstract t create one, protected abstract t create two. Now what these are going to do is force a particular object to be created so that we can do equality tests. So roughly we'll do 1 equals create 1, 2 equals create 2, and then we'll just say 1 should be 2, 2 should be 2, and we're also going to check everything else as well. So 1 double equals 2, wrap that in brackets, should be true. Oh, it's not going to let us do this, is it? Because I'm using a generic type. I wonder if I can do where t I equatable t. No. And I can't use the class constraint. Is there any way to use a generic to say has an implicit, has an overridden operator? I don't think so. That's annoying. Oh well, we'll have to rely on these parts then. 1 dot equals 2 should be true. 2 dot equals 1 should be true. No, actually, none of those should be equal. Right, and then we'll do the same for inequality. This should be 2. This is not, and this should be false. But the error we're hitting, I think, is to do with dictionary keys. So when checking by hash, so what we'll do is create 2 of these again. And then create a hash set of t. We shall add 1 to it, and now we'll write some comparisons. We'll do that as well because that's a bit nice to read. So hash contains 1 should be true. Hash contains 2 should be false. And we also want to check that hash dot contains create 1 should be true. So that's 2 separate references to an object. So we've checked that checking directly referenced same object exists, and we're also checking that a different reference also exists. So we now just need to go into our tests and implement those methods. And as we need to have static GUIDs, we'll just do let's do it like this. So we'll do underscore. Now we want to create each time, so we'll do GUID.new GUID.toString underscore 2 equals GUID.new GUID toString. Create some fields for those. This is because we want to create a separate reference each time, but we need this ID to be the same each time. So, in fact, we don't even need to use GUIDs, which means we can get rid of all that. Because a group ID is just string based as is the user ID, so we can do group ID parse 1 and group ID parse 2. Right, and let's do user ID first because that's the easier one. It's basically identical to that. Except this is a user ID. And then finally is the toggle. Now this one does use GUIDs. So rather than doing what I was doing earlier, which was writing into a variable on the class, what I shall do is create the methods. Oh, need to space that. And then here I shall do GUID.parse GUID. Why is there not a version that's quoted already? I'll do the same here as well. Oh, blast. Missed the quote. There we go. Right, now let's rerun the tests. Hopefully some of these will fail as well, which will show us that that's where our issue is. If these don't fail, then it means that I've broken the actual when doing toggly things test. Boom, many exceptions. Right, so now we're actually being pointed in the right direction, which is our equality tests. Interesting. One should not be two. Two should not. Oh. One. Could also just be me making typos. 1 2 2 1 1 2 2 1 1 2 2 1 1 2 2 1. Right, let's run this again. Right, so it's the toggly things that are broken. I'm just going to add those tests though. ID tests, user ID tests, and toggle ID tests. Oh, not having that. Group ID, not having this blank bad white space either. Don't like Git yelling at me about bad white space. ID tests, user ID tests, group ID tests, toggle ID tests. There we go. So tests, no, ID tests. Also test equality and hashing. Right, now we can go back onto fixing our toggly test. Is it that one? Yes. Right. Let's do .NET test. Source Crispin.tests, Crispin.tests. I'm not entirely sure on what the syntax is that you can run a single test. Oh well. Right, so let's check our definitions of things. So our anonymous user is empty. User 1 in group 1, user 2 in group 2. So those look fine. And we're setting them up correctly. User 1 in group 1 returns group 1. User 2, the groups for user 2 in group 2 returns group 2. So one of these cases is wrong. I'm tempted to put an index on this as well, just so I can see what number it is, which one is breaking, but should be able to work that out from here as well. So, single event with active true, group 2, user blank. So that's this one. The user passed in is user 2, group 2. This one. So when we switch on for group 2, the user 2 in group 2 should be true. Now I do recall changing something in here, and I wonder if it's this block causing the problem. So let's do the first thing. Because we can't debug this, we go back to PHP style debugging, adding write lines everywhere. User groups. Let's make this an interpolated string. So user ID, user ID, and do that. And actually I'd almost say it's not worth doing this because this is something set up which we know works. It's the output of this that's wrong, I suspect. So console.writeLine, all groups. Oh, I wonder. No, maybe not. All groups, and we shall output everything that we actually know about. So we'll do groups.keys select. Actually, do we need to do that? Okay, might just be able to do this. String.join with a comma all the groups. Console right line set groups. Do this. Oh, string.join with a comma set groups. We should get some trues and falses back from that, I think. Let's try running that. Now the downside is going to be figuring out which one is related to the test, because we've got quite a lot of test cases. So what I might do is actually comment out all of the test case setups except for the one we care about, because otherwise I'm going to get that, which is not very useful. Which are all blank, that seems unlikely. Should be just toString in those, and that has an override for toString. Returning the group. It should be parsed. Maybe that's the problem. Membership. E.group. And this one doesn't have a group set on it, but we're not applying that one. See, this one was our only test. Let's do this. That's one of the failing ones. My goodness, a debugger would make this so much easier. Might actually be forced to update Visual Studio until the next early access of Rudder comes out. Right, so I'm not getting any useful output from that. Can I instead do this? I do like abusing JSON.NET for debugging help. It's because we have no groups. Right, so if those groups are empty, why are they empty? Because we should be calling that. So when we look at this, we have group 2 there. So we call assuming it is call handling switching. And then we add the group and mark it as active. handle switching, and that gets the group and active. I don't see that message printing anywhere. Which would indicate that method is not being called. Let's do this instead. e.user, e.group. Now if this doesn't appear, that would indicate that we're not printing correctly, and it might be because normally with XUnit you need to inject the iTest output helper rather than using console write lines. What did I call the message? Handle switching. Handle switching definitely has a group there. Right. And the user is blank, as it should be. Let's do this. I dislike debugging like this. Just think how much easier this would have been if I could have just set a breakpoint and inspected some variables. Or just, step through the method. User. Right. So an unset user is different. Of course an unset user is different. That's because an unset user hasn't got an empty string, it's got null in there instead. How do I want to handle that? I could change my empty to be null. Actually, I know how to handle it. Because I don't want two values to represent empty. My Nightbot is working now. What the hell? Didn't work earlier when both me and someone else tried it. Weird. We'll do string to empty. So now we definitely can't have two versions of an empty user. Doesn't matter if you use null or string empty, you'll still get that. I suppose I should technically trim it as well, but right. Test once more. Maybe he does. Maybe. Or maybe I've just got the cooldown on the Nightbot configured too high or something. Right, now what? Yes, because it's a struct. It's not calling that constructor, is it? It's just calling the default one. And you can't override the default constructor in a struct, I don't think, can you? Yeah, no. I like it being a struct. So how do I handle having null there? I suppose easily enough we just reverse this and say if No, let's do string dot is null or white space user. If it's null or white space, null. Otherwise, user. I suppose that needs to be typed as a string, doesn't it? And that needs to not exist. Oh, it doesn't need to be typed as a string. Why Rider and not Visual Studio? Because I'm a hipster. No, I think Rider's faster. And it's cross-platform, and I want to ditch Windows 10. And so once all my projects are on the .NET Core build system, then I can switch back to using Ubuntu permanently, which means I'll need cross-platform ID, which means Rider. And as I already pay for a ReSharper license, adding Rider to it wasn't much more expensive. Hurrah, our tests now pass. So let's uncomment all of these again. The only downside is Rider doesn't support .NET Core 2 yet. It will do apparently with next week's next early access deployment. So I'm looking forward to that, because at the moment I'm debugging by pretending I'm in PHP and just whacking echoes all over the place, which is not my favourite way of debugging. Of course, this should still fail because I've only fixed the group ID. No, I fixed the user ID. To do that, I need that same logic in the group ID. That. But I suppose none of them had a null group, but hey. Right, let's run all the tests now that I've messed around with the ID type, because that's used everywhere. What time is it? 9:15. Might have time to do validation. Hooray, that's better. What did I change on this? Oh yeah, splitting events. Oh, bad white space. Toggle state tests. Toggle switched off for group. Wow, highlighting's properly broken there. Okay, that's not right. Let's just unload that project and reload it. Yes, so what I like Rider, there are one or two rough edges to it, but you know, it's early access, so. Alright, let's check that again. That's better. Let's fix all of these. That. That one's fine. That one's fine. That one's fine. Okay. Much better. Apart from some more dodgy white space. What is in this? Or what file is this in? Toggle. There's an exact match there. Select that one. And toggle state. Much better, right. Events, split, switch on, and switch off into separate events for each user classification. Great. Now we've done that, let's go on to something more interesting. Well, potentially more interesting. Now that we have endpoints where we can update data, we want to validate that we're getting valid data in here. So, for instance, this create toggle request. We want to make sure that both the name is filled out and the description is optionally filled out. Now, while I could put the data, the validation in here, I don't want to, because validation is not part of the controller's responsibility. And as we're using the mediator pipeline, what we can do is try and hook up a decorator which will do the validation for us. So in here I think we already have a behavior, so we have this existing timing behavior. What we'll do is use that as a basis for our validation behavior. We have, hang on, is this Americanly or Englishly spelt? Americanly. Should have a U in it, damn it. So we'll just paste this in, remove this bit to there, remove that, and we're not going to have a logger, and that's a constructor, and we're definitely not having a logger of any form. So we probably don't need that constructor yet. Some missing references. So the basis of this is that. We now have a decorator, effectively, that doesn't do anything. What we're going to do is use the dependency container to pull in a type which will be our validator. So a validator, I don't know what the interface needs to look like yet, but we'll add a constructor, and we will now want a validator. So we'll call it an iRequest validator, and it'll be of T request. We'll just store that there. And now, before we pass on to the next decorator, we'll say if validator validate request. Now we want to do things with this. I think throwing in a validation exception is the right thing to do here. So we'll do if that. Now, I think I'm going to structure this so that we'll have var messages. If messages.any throw new validation exception. Oh, there is a validation exception already. Let's see what we can pass into that. Come on, tell me what your constructor's like. Or, you know, don't. Ah, needs a reference. Right, so we'll have our own validation exception type. And that'll have a constructor, and I can't remember all the ones I'm supposed to implement, but we'll take an IEnumerable of string messages, and we will call the base, and we'll do string.join, join them with a new line messages. Do we have like a, I want to actually put Actually, no, there's no point putting validation failed. You can tell it failed because it didn't pass. And we will have an auto property as well, so that if someone handles this, they can actually have a nice way of getting the messages rather than doing string parsing. And to stop sharper shouting this, we'll use an array there, and we've now defined what our request validator actually needs to have. So it's an interface of T. Do we need to put a constraint on this? No. And we have a single validate method, which returns a string array. I don't really want to return a string array. Maybe an iCollection is better. I'll do an iCollection because this way I can have an iCollection here, because I don't want to iterate an IEnumerable twice, but I also don't want to force people into creating a list of all their messages and then to arraying the list, because that's annoying. So we do iCollection here. Right. That needs that, and that now takes in the messages. And we'll delete some superfluous brackets. Right, we now have validation, but we need to handle if there isn't a validator. I don't know how to do that. I want to put this into the pipeline and say, if you don't have a validator, that's fine. We might just end up with a default validator, so we'd end up with a public. Can I actually use Resharper to implement this? Create derived type, yes. Default validator. And this will basically do nothing, but for the time being, let's not do that. Right. Let's create a namespace for these actually. Validation. Move that into that. Split types into matching files. And fix the namespace. And that's fine. Oh. And that needs that. Right. Now let's write some tests. Can I create an instance of that standard IO container that the REST API will use? Dependency model, I guess. Maybe. I don't know what it's actually called. Oh well. Right, so our startup class here already registers things, so effectively we're going to want to recreate this in a test. We'll do add transient, and it's a type of did I call it an iRequest validator? Yes. And it takes the concrete type, which is the same, but not an interface. Ah, it's not that, that's an iPipeline behavior. Maybe I didn't call it a request validator. I call it a validation behavior. Okay. Right, now theoretically, something will happen. I don't know what, because we don't have any implementations of that class. But I don't know what the behavior of the standard MVC container is. So I'm just going to run it and find out. I suspect we'll get an exception. And to do this, we shall use the Restful API tester. And the first thing we'll do is just to get to the toggles endpoint, because this is still going to send a request through, it's just not got anything to do. And we got an internal server error. It's not altogether unsurprising. Unable to resolve service of type iRequest validator for a get or toggle request. What we want is like an optional resolution of that. And type discovery, in fact, because I don't want to register all of those into the container, I want them to be magically found. And, right. Try add transient? No, that doesn't seem to make sense. We might actually have to switch to a proper container rather than this. But it must be doing this somehow, because mediator does things with this. Add mediator classes. And required servers. Let's go and have a look at these. Service provider, get a single instance factory. No, I don't think that's what we're after. Let's try that one. Yeah, so rather than scanning, they're just service add concretions that could be closed. So they're doing assembly scanning by iterating all the types in the assembly. I don't want to do that, but it might be the only way to manage it. Or I can switch to using structure map, which will do type scanning for us, but I know that type scanning is marginally broken in .NET Core 2 anyway. But we also need it to be an optional service as well, because we need to handle it. It only needs to be conditionally added to the pipeline if there is a valid validator for this behavior. I don't think doing this is a valid way of fixing that. Yeah, no. Why can I not scroll up to the top of this with the keyboard? Oh, object reference not set to. Oh, that is a valid way of doing it then. line 18. Yeah. So if we do this, if let's call validator is not null, what's that? Has no constructors defined? No, that's just Rider being silly. Right, wait for this to finish building and then we'll try again. There we go. So that didn't throw any exceptions. Now, let's try doing this. We'll stop that and go into our validation behaviors. And let's just implement one. Public class create toggle validator. And this is a create toggle request, I think was the class. I request validator. Missing members. And in here we should just, ooh, object, that's not right. T. So in here we'll just say if request string dot is null or white space request dot name return yield return. Can I do that in here? No. Well, that's our only return anyway, so we'll just do new. The name property must be filled out, and we can also hook into things like Fluent Validator here. And here, just do return array dot empty string. Right. Now I'm not going to register this in the container. I'm going to see what happens. I don't know if this will work. And once we have validation hooked up, we can then implement a decorator on the MVC pipeline, which will look for validation exceptions, catch those, and then throw, rather than returning a 500 internal server error, we can make it write out a 400 bad request instead. So we do a get to that, that should still work. It does. So now if we do a post, and we'll not fill out the body correctly, we'll just give it an empty JSON thing. Let's give it the description, because that's the optional parameter. And try that. Now we got a server error. See, it didn't hit our validation, it hit the domain's validation instead. So apparently we do need to register this in the container. And this is where we'll end up writing an extension method to find all of these automatically, because I don't want to have to remember to add these each time. So if I do an I, do I need to, can I just do that? Will that work? Or do I have to actually specify that it's an iValidator of a kind of request. Clear buffer. And let's see what error we got. No, that's still from the domain, so let's try an I request validator of create toggle request. Like that. Yeah. If this works, then we'll have to write a, or we'll leave it manually registered for now and then write an extension method that'll scan and add things. Right, hopefully we got a different error this time. Yeah, validation exception. So now we can just implement a decorator that catches validation exceptions and prints them out nicely instead. So I think that'll do for this evening. We did eventually get to what I wanted to do, but it took a little longer than expected due to me breaking tests left, right and centre. Let's see. I'm not going to push those validation changes yet because we'll continue on those tomorrow. But the other 6 commits can be pushed up. So if you've got any questions about any of this, the code is available on GitHub. It's at github.com/ponderdom/Crispin. And if you want to ask me any questions or anything, feel free to either raise GitHub issues or send me a message on Twitch or on Twitter. My handle on basically every service is @ponderdom, so find me everywhere. Yeah, thanks for watching and thanks for the chat interaction. Hope everyone has a good evening.